The courtroom was supposed to be quiet, reverent, the kind of space where voices drop into whispers out of respect for the gavel. But silence shattered in an instant. Marcus Doyle, 40 years old, broad-shouldered, an IT engineer who had once been praised for his brilliance in cloud security, slammed his hand against his laptop. The crack of plastic echoed like a gunshot in the chamber. "You left me." He spat at his ex-wife across the aisle, his voice carrying in the marble room. "So you don't get our memories." Gasps rippled through the audience. Even the bailiff's hand twitched toward his belt. On the screen behind him, connected by cable and arrogance, thousands of vacation photos appeared in an instant. The projector flooded the courtroom wall with images. Marcus and Clara in Venice. Marcus and Clara at the Grand Canyon. Marcus and Clara holding their newborn daughter at the beach in Barcelona. For a brief second, the room was bathed in borrowed sunshine from trips long gone. Everyone could see their happiness. Two people smiling, their bodies close, their faces radiant with the illusion of forever. And then, click. One photo vanished. A sharp digital beep followed. Another click. Another beep. Another memory erased. The rhythm built like a metronome of destruction. Beep. 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 Each sound stabbed the air, mechanical and cruel, like a knife slicing through laughter and birthdays and anniversaries. Clara Jensen, 38, once an art teacher who believed in preserving beauty, now sat frozen in the witness chair. Her knuckles whitened as she clutched the edge of her seat. She could feel her nails cutting into the worn oak, the sharpness grounding her against the unreality unfolding before her. Inside, her mind screamed, "Just because I left him, he thinks he can erase our entire youth?" Her chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. But yet tears didn't come. Not now. Not in front of him, like when he wanted them most. Instead, her lips parted. The words came softly, almost drowned by the relentless beep of deletion. "A memory is not a hostage," she murmured. The clerk closest to her tilted her head, as though the whisper had tugged at a string only she could hear. His frenzy was absolute. His finger hovered over the delete key like a judge's gavel raised to strike. He turned toward the screen as if savoring his own power. Each image was proof of his control. Proof that even after the divorce papers, even after Clara walked away, he still owned their shared life. He wanted the world to see him as the keeper of history. He wanted her to beg. "Look at them," Marcus shouted, gesturing to the wall of projected faces. "She mocked me for taking these. Said I wasted time, but I preserved everything. I gave our marriage meaning." Beep. Another photo vanished. Their first Christmas in New York. Beep. Another gone. A kiss in Kyoto beneath cherry blossoms. Beep. Another erased. Clara holding their daughter's hand on her first day of kindergarten. The sound of deletion grew unbearable, like a heart monitor flatlining again and again. Clara pressed her palm to her sternum, feeling the phantom ache of a heartbeat under siege. Yet she did not cry. Instead, her eyes locked on the silver USB drive that had slipped from Marcus's jacket pocket in his rage. It clattered against the tile floor and rolled, slow and steady, until it stopped at the polished shoes of Judge Whitaker. The judge's brow furrowed, but he didn't move. His gaze, however, fixed on Marcus with sharpened suspicion. Above them, the red light of the security camera blinked, recording everything, every word, every deletion, every act of arrogance. Marcus's laughter cut the tension. Low, guttural, triumphant. "You see?" he jeered. "Without me, there is no us. Without me, you are nothing but a blank hard drive." Clara inhaled, steadying her voice. She knew everyone could hear the tremor beneath her calm. "No, Marcus," she said, not loud, not soft, but firm enough to ripple through the hush that had fallen. "You can delete files. You can't delete me, and you can't delete truth." For the first time since the tirade began, Marcus faltered. His finger hovered above the key. His jaw clenched. The audience leaned forward, sensing the invisible collision about to happen. The bailiff whispered to the clerk, "Should I stop him?" The clerk shook her head slightly, eyes wide. "Let it play. Everyone needs to see. Clara's mind flashed through the years. The countless times she had smiled in photos, unaware that one day those smiles would be used as bargaining chips. The way Marcus's obsession with control had grown quietly, pixel by pixel, until it filled every corner of their lives. She thought of the nights she stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if leaving him would mean losing everything, including the past. And then she thought of her students, how she had once told them, "Art is memory. Memory is identity. Without it, you vanish." Her voice steadied, louder now. "A memory is not a hostage." The words cut through the chamber, echoed against the marble walls. Reporters scribbled them down instantly. Phones recorded. Hashtags were born in real time. Marcus snarled, but the chant of deletion no longer sounded triumphant. The beep became hollow, desperate, a confession of fear disguised as power. The judge's gavel struck once. Bang! Ah! A sound deeper than any delete key. "Enough," Judge Whitaker roared. "This courtroom is not your stage, Mr. Doyle." Marcus froze, sweat glistening at his temples. His hand trembled over the keyboard, uncertain now. Clara's gaze never wavered. For the first time in years, she felt taller than him. The chamber seemed to pause, air thick with electricity, every breath held hostage by suspense. And then the screen went black. For a heartbeat, it was as though the world itself had been erased. In the silence that followed, all anyone could hear was Clara's voice, calm and unbroken. "A memory is not a hostage." Tom, the camera light blinked red. The silver USB glinted by the judge's shoe. And in that suspended moment, every soul in the courtroom knew this was no ordinary divorce dispute. This was the beginning of a war over digital justice. The courtroom had barely recovered from the chaos of deletion when Marcus Doyle adjusted his tie, slicked back his damp hair, and stepped into the role he had rehearsed for weeks. The wronged guardian of memory? Gone was the manic rage of the previous outburst. He now wore a mask of calm authority, the kind that plays well in transcripts. His lawyer gave him a subtle nod. "Now, Marcus. Now you play the hero." He raised his voice, loud enough to command attention, but measured enough to sound credible. "Clara never cared about these photos," Marcus declared. His words hung in the air like scripture. "She mocked me for taking them. Yedden said I was wasting time. I was the one who made the trips meaningful. I was the one who preserved us." The phrase, "preserved us," struck with calculated weight. The prosecutor leaned back, lips curling in faint agreement, as if Marcus's version of reality already sounded reasonable. Clara sat rigid in her chair, eyes sharp as glass. Her silence wasn't submission. It was observation. Every word, every pause, every tilt of Marcus's chin was being catalogued in her mind. Marcus pressed forward. He gestured toward the laptop like a preacher presenting relics. "I stored everything. Cloud servers, external drives, triple backups. I even built a private archive at home. Without me, there would be nothing. Without me, she would have forgotten every detail." The motif repeated, again and again, a drumbeat of deception. She didn't value them. She didn't value them. Each repetition reinforced the narrative, stitching falsehood into fabric. The gallery began to nod along. People wanted a simple story. A devoted husband preserving love while an ungrateful wife sneered at his devotion. The young clerk at the side table looked uneasy. She glanced up from her notes, lips pressing tight, but she said nothing. Her silence was the silence of someone caught between truth and hierarchy. Marcus's eyes gleamed as he reached under the table and produced a hardcover book. Its glossy cover reflected the fluorescent light. He held it up triumphantly. "This," he said, voice swelling with pride, "is one of my digital trophies." Gasps again from the audience. The book was thick, a coffee table tome bound in leather. Across the cover, in embossed silver letters, were the words, "Captured by Marcus Doyle." Inside were hundreds of printed vacation photos. Clara's laughter, Clara's gaze at sunsets, Clara holding their daughter's tiny hand. But nowhere was Clara's name. Not even once. Clara's jaw tightened. She felt her stomach knot. The erasure was so complete, it had been bound, sealed, and sold back to himself as accomplishment. Marcus flipped the pages dramatically, showing the court their former happiness reframed as his personal triumph. See? Proof. I wasn't careless. I wasn't cruel. I curated everything. I made sure our memories lived on. His lawyer interjected smoothly. Mr. Doyle, would you say you were the primary archivist of your family? Yes, Marcus replied instantly. The sole archivist. Clara laughed when I took photos. She said, I looked like a tourist clown. She didn't value them. The words landed heavy, sinking into the transcript like lead. Clara inhaled sharply but remained silent. Her eyes, however, betrayed nothing but steel. The prosecutor smirked, leaning toward the bench. It seems clear, Your Honor, that Mr. Doyle carried the emotional weight of this marriage's history. Judge Whitaker nodded slightly, his expression unreadable. Then came the twist. The so-called corroboration. From the back of the gallery, a man rose. Tall, tanned, with sunglasses perched on his head as though he'd come straight from the airport. He introduced himself in a casual tone. My name is Patrick Ellis. I traveled with Marcus and Clara once to Santorini. Marcus's eyes lit up. He extended a hand toward Patrick like a magician revealing his assistant. Patrick was there. He saw how Clara mocked me for documenting our trip. Tell them, Patrick. Patrick nodded eagerly. Yes, that's true. Clara. She rolled her eyes every time Marcus took out his camera. She said something like, You're wasting time behind the lens instead of living. It laughed about it. A murmur of agreement spread through the audience. The prosecutor scribbled a note, clearly pleased. Clara's pulse hammered, but she kept her expression calm. Inside, though, she replayed the Santorini trip in her mind. The heat of the Mediterranean sun, whitewashed walls, the dates etched in her memory like frescoes. Patrick continued, a little too confidently. It was July 2016. I remember because the island was crowded with tourists from the cruise ships. Marcus was the only one taking serious photos. Clara teased him the whole time. July 2016. Clara's head tilted ever so slightly. Her eyes narrowed. July 2016? They hadn't been in Santorini then. They were in Lisbon that summer. Santorini was the year before, 2015. It was a subtle slip, but for Clara, it was the crack in the facade. The kind of detail that separates truth from rehearsed lies. She did not move, did not speak, but she felt the corner of her lips twitch, the ghost of a knowing smile. Marcus, oblivious, patted Patrick on the shoulder like a prize witness. Thank you. You see? Even our friends knew Clara mocked me. Patrick beamed, unaware of the trap he had just set for his credibility. The young clerk at the side table shifted uncomfortably again, her pen hesitating above the page. She had caught the discrepancy too, but once more, she remained silent. Fear and protocol kept her still. Marcus resumed his performance. He walked back to the screen, gesturing at the empty black projection. Clara wants to play the victim, but she never valued any of this. Look, carried the weight. I curated the past. Without me, there would be no proof we even existed. His words filled the courtroom like smoke, choking logic, suffocating nuance. The audience inhaled his certainty. Clara sat perfectly still, her eyes locked on Marcus, her mind replaying Patrick's error like a tape loop. July 2016. Wrong year. Wrong trip. The lie is already cracking, but she would not reveal it. Not yet. For now, she allowed Marcus his stage, his delusions, his false coronation as guardian of memory. She would let him weave his web tighter and tighter. The tighter it became, the easier it would be to tear apart in front of everyone. Her silence was not weakness. It was strategy. The motif repeated once more, Marcus hammering it in with a voice like a sermon. She didn't value them. She didn't value them. He didn't value them. And with every echo, Clara's eyes grew colder, sharper, more certain. In that moment, it was no longer Marcus on the offensive. It was Marcus laying the groundwork for his own undoing. He just didn't know it yet. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs after Marcus's testimony. His words still clung to the walls like smoke, thick and convincing, and for a moment it seemed as if Clara Jensen had already been reduced to a ghost of her own history. Judge Whittaker cleared his throat. "Miss Jensen, you may now respond." The room stilled. All eyes turned to Clara. She rose slowly, smoothing the fabric of her blazer as though brushing off invisible dust. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, an answer in themselves to Marcus's frenzy. Her voice, when it came, was calm. Not meek, not loud, but calm. The kind of calm that carried more weight than shouting ever could. "Under the Copyright Act," she began, "and under marital property laws in multiple states, digital assets created during a marriage belong equally to both parties. That includes photos. That includes videos. That includes every file that contains both of us." The words struck like clean chalk lines on a blackboard. Measured, clear, undeniable. A ripple ran through the gallery. Some nodded, some frowned, but all listened. The prosecutor, who moments before had seemed satisfied with Marcus's narrative, leaned forward now, pen scratching hesitantly across a yellow pad. Marcus's jaw tightened. His face reddened, and he couldn't resist cutting in. "She doesn't even understand tech. She barely knows how to back up her phone." Clara turned toward him, her gaze steady. "I don't need to be an engineer to know the law." The simplicity of the statement made it heavy, immovable. It hung in the air like a stone none could lift away. Judge Whittaker tapped his pen, intrigued. "Eed, Miss Jensen." Clara exhaled, her breaths slow and measured, like a pianist counting beats before striking the keys. She wasn't just arguing, she was teaching. Her tone shifted into something instructional, each word carrying the cadence of a lecture. "When a marriage dissolves," she explained, "property must be divided fairly. That includes houses, cars, bank accounts, and now, in our digital age, assets like photos and videos. These images are not Marcus's alone. They are shared memories. By law, I have as much right to them as he does." The audience leaned in. The courtroom wasn't listening to a bitter ex-wife. They were listening to a lecturer in justice, a professor in lived experience. She paused, then lifted a sheet of paper from her folder. But it wasn't paper. It was glossy. An image. She held it high enough for the judge and jury box to see. It was a photo of Venice. The two of them standing on the Rialto Bridge at sunset, their daughter perched on Clara's shoulders, Marcus's arm awkwardly but proudly wrapped around both. "This," Clara said, her voice steady but softer now, "is the only photo I still possess. One single file. Printed before Marcus locked me out." She looked directly at Marcus. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Clara turned back to the judge. Her voice sharpened. "If even this photo belongs to him alone, then where do I exist?" The silence that followed was deafening. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to pause. It was not a legal argument. It was something deeper. A philosophical wound cut open in the middle of a courtroom. Reporters' pens raced across notepads, capturing the line they knew would make tomorrow's headlines. Clara lowered the photo gently, setting it on the evidence table as though laying down a fragile artifact. She continued, her voice slipping back into lecture mode, guiding the chamber like students through a lesson. "The law is clear. Digital property cannot be erased by one spouse simply because the other walks away. That is why I ask this court to issue a preservation order, so no more of these memories can be destroyed. So no more history can be erased in a fit of rage." Her breath slowed again, a deliberate rhythm. Each inhale, each exhale, like commas placed carefully in a sentence. She wanted the room to feel her composure. Marcus slammed his palm against the table. "Bliss. She mocked me every time I lifted the camera." "Mr. Doyle," Judge Whittaker interrupted sharply. "You had your turn." Marcus sank back, seething, his knuckles white against the wood. Clara did not flinch. She let the interruption serve her. "I know what Marcus wants," she said, her eyes sweeping the chamber. "He wants control. Control of the narrative. Control of the evidence. Control of our history. But marriage is not dictatorship. And divorce does not erase my humanity. She stopped, letting the words echo. Her mind flickered back to another courtroom years ago, when she sat beside a friend whose husband had wiped every photo from their shared drive during a divorce. She remembered her friend's trembling hands, the quiet sobs at losing not just a marriage but the entire record of it. Clara swallowed, the memory fueling her next words. I once watched someone lose everything, every wedding photo, every family snapshot, because her husband destroyed them. I swore I would never let that happen again. Not to me, not to anyone. The gallery stirred. A few heads nodded. A reporter glanced at another, mouthing, "This is bigger than divorce." Clara's eyes swept back to the judge. They are evidence of existence. Q. Proof that a life was lived. And no one has the right to unilaterally erase existence. She let that sink in. Then, softer, almost like a closing line in a lecture, Photos are not pixels. They are people. The clerk who had hesitated earlier scribbled the phrase in the margin of her notes, underlining it twice. Clara straightened. Her breathing slowed, her presence commanding, not through volume but through gravity. The entire chamber seemed to lean toward her, as though she were gravity itself. Marcus shifted in his seat, eyes darting. He muttered, "She's twisting this." But his words were drowned by the rustle of the gallery, the rising hum of realization. Clara did not smile, but inside she knew the tide had turned. Marcus's lies, his trophies, his witnesses, all were beginning to fray. And all she had done was stand, speak calmly, and hold up a single photo. The courtroom was no longer Marcus's stage. It was hers. The courtroom had grown restless. Clara's calm lecture, her request for a preservation order, her steady defiance. It had unsettled the air. The audience no longer leaned toward Marcus. They leaned toward her. Judge Whitaker shifted in his chair. His gavel rested in his hand, but he had not yet struck it. He studied Clara, perhaps sensing there was more beneath her measured composure. Jensen inhaled. For years she had carried silence like armor, choosing not to disclose the full scope of who she was. For years she had played smaller than her truth. But not anymore. She reached into the inner pocket of her folder. Fingers brushed against the cool edge of plastic. Her pulse thudded once, steady and certain. Then she drew it out. A card. Black, official, stamped with the seal of the United States District Court. She lifted it high so the bench, the jury, the cameras could see. "My name is Clara Jensen," she declared, her voice unshaking. "Licensed attorney, Southern District of New York." The words cracked the silence like thunder. Slow motion. The fluorescent lights caught the gold-embossed lettering, the federal seal glinting under glass. The room's collective breath seemed to hold, as though the chamber itself had forgotten how to exhale. A pen clattered. The young clerk had dropped hers, eyes wide, hand pressed to her mouth. Reporters jolted forward, their pens racing now, flashes from cameras igniting like lightning across storm clouds. Marcus Doyle's mouth fell open. His face drained pale, then flushed crimson. His lips moved, but no sound came out. For once, he was wordless. Clara looked at him, not with triumph, not with spite, but with the clarity of inevitability. "I have kept silent long enough," her mind whispered. "Now it is time to sit where I belong." But she wasn't finished. From her leather briefcase she pulled something heavier, folded in careful layers of fabric. The rustle of cloth filled the chamber, amplified in the stillness. She shook it once, and black fabric spilled out like a shadow reclaiming light. A judicial robe. The room erupted in murmurs. Someone gasped audibly. Slow motion, the robe unfurled, its black folds gliding through the fluorescent glow, the golden piping at its edge shimmering. The cloth seemed to absorb the chaos around it, demanding silence. Clara slipped her arms into the sleeves with ritual precision. The weight of it settled across her shoulders, not as costume, not as disguise, but as truth. The clerk whispered, then louder, unable to contain it. "She's not just a victim." The words caught fire, spreading through the gallery in gasps. "She's the judge." The phrase reverberated, echoing like a verdict across the marble walls. Marcus staggered back in his chair, knuckles clutching the table edge. No, no, this isn't real. His voice cracked, no longer commanding but desperate. Judge Whittaker's eyes widened, then softened with recognition. He leaned back, nodding with solemn gravity. Ms. Jensen, Counselor Jensen, I had heard of your appointment. I did not realize. You weren't supposed to, Clara replied calmly. She adjusted the robe, her hands smoothing the fabric. Until now. The judge rose slowly, then stepped aside. With a measured gesture, he motioned for Clara to approach. The chamber held its breath as she crossed the floor. Every footstep echoed, her heels striking the marble with authority. She walked past Marcus. He shrank in his seat as though her presence were a weight pressing him down. Clara ascended the dais. She did not sit in Judge Whittaker's chair, not yet. That would have been too much, too soon. Instead, she stood beside him, her robe visible to all, her card still in hand. When she spoke, her voice was both colleague and witness. I stand not only as Clara Jensen, plaintiff in this case, but also as an officer of this court, bound by oath to uphold the law. And the law is clear. No individual has the right to unilaterally erase shared property, whether physical or digital. Her eyes swept the chamber. The robe lent weight, but it was her steady gaze that carried the true authority. Oh, this is not theatrics. This is justice. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. His earlier smugness evaporated, replaced by a nervous glance toward his notes, as though they had betrayed him. Marcus sputtered, his voice trembling. She can't. This is bias. She's not supposed to. This isn't fair. Clara's eyes locked on him. Fair? Fair would have been preserving our memories, not erasing them to punish me. Fair would have been respecting the life we built, not rewriting it as your possession. Her words sliced through him sharper than any gavel strike. The robe's folds shimmered again as she turned toward the gallery. I did not come here today intending to reveal this. I came as a woman seeking justice for herself. But if the system doubts my voice as Clara Jensen, the ex-wife, then let it reckon with my voice as Judge Jensen of the Southern District. The audience stirred. Phones lifted. Cameras clicked. The story was writing itself into legend. Marcus muttered again, his shoulders slumping. This isn't possible. But it was. And everyone knew it. For Clara, the moment was more than strategy. It was reclamation. Years of silence, of being minimized, of being told she was secondary. It all dissolved beneath the weight of the robe. Inside, her thoughts whispered one final time. I have kept silent long enough. Now I sit where I belong. She lowered her hand, placing the attorney card beside the single Venice photo on the evidence table. The juxtaposition was unmistakable. Identity and memory, side by side, neither erased. Judge Whittaker, with deliberate gravity, addressed the room. The balance of this proceeding has shifted. Effective immediately, the testimony of Clara Jensen will be considered with the authority due her station. This court will not dismiss the words of a judge, nor the rights of a citizen. The gavel struck. Bang! And the echoes carried like cannon fire. Clara stood taller, the robe draped like shadow in gold. Marcus sat crumpled, his lies unraveling thread by thread. The audience whispered, the phrase spreading like wildfire, she's not just a victim. She's the judge. And for the first time since the marriage ended, since the erasures began, Clara Jensen was no longer defending herself. She was defining the battlefield. The air in the courtroom was heavy, thick with expectation. Clara Jensen, no longer merely the plaintiff, but standing in the robe of a judge, waited as the gavel's echoes faded. She held the weight of the room in her hands, not by force, but by certainty. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady, directed toward Judge Whittaker, though the entire chamber leaned forward to hear. I move to admit electronic evidence, metadata, cloud backups, and testimony from the IT technician present during the attempted deletion. Proceed. Clara crossed to the evidence cart, her robe sweeping behind her like a banner. She placed the silver USB drive, the one that had clattered to the floor earlier, on the tray. Its metal surface gleamed under the fluorescent light, a small but undeniable symbol of preservation. This, Clara said, holding it up, contains a full backup of the photo archive. Acquired legally, time-stamped, and preserved under order pending this trial. The audience stirred. Marcus's eyes widened. He leaned forward, shaking his head furiously. That's mine. That's private property. Clara didn't flinch. No, Marcus. These are marital assets. Joint property. Shared memories. And, by law, evidence. She inserted the USB into the court's display system. The projector whirred to life. A black screen gave way to light, then images. Bright, full of life, memories resurrected in front of everyone. First, Paris. Clara and Marcus in front of the Eiffel Tower, their daughter hoisted high on Marcus's shoulders. File 1, Clara narrated calmly. Created May 14, 2012. Metadata confirms 9:42 p.m. local Paris time. GPS coordinates, Champ de Mars. Boarding passes show Marcus and I landed in Paris the day before. Hotel receipts place us at the Hôtel du Cygne that night. The photo froze on the screen, the metadata box appearing beside it like an indictment. Murmurs swept through the gallery. Next slide, Tokyo. A snapshot of Clara standing under lanterns in Asakusa, Marcus blurred in the background, mid-laugh. File 2, April 2, 2014, 7:18 p.m. Japan Standard Time. Metadata matches our boarding passes on Japan Airlines, Flight 005. Hotel invoice confirms our stay at the Shinjuku Grand Bell. The timestamps glowed on the wall, irrefutable. Marcus's breath quickened. His hands clutched the table, knuckles pale. Clara's voice grew firmer. These numbers are not just data. They are years. They are birthdays, anniversaries, a child's first steps. She paused, letting the words sink in. The clerk scribbled furiously, capturing every syllable. Another image appeared, the Grand Canyon. Clara holding her daughter's hand, Marcus a few steps behind, staring out into the abyss of stone and time. 3. Metadata. August 19, 2015, 4033 p.m. GPS coordinates confirm. South Rim, Yavapai Point. Park admission tickets match. Even the weather record confirms that exact sky. The photo expanded to fill the wall, sunset orange, a family silhouette immortalized. The gallery hummed. Reporters whispered, pens scratching like fire on paper. A woman in the back dabbed her eyes. Marcus suddenly lurched to his feet. This is manipulation. This is fabricated. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Clara's gaze. He seemed to know the tide had turned. Clara didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The metadata does not lie, Marcus. You do. She pressed a key. Another image appeared. Clara's daughter, blowing out candles on her 5th birthday. Marcus's hands hovered in the background, lighting sparklers. Clara's voice cracked for the first time, not from weakness, but from truth. And this file is not just a photo. It is my daughter's childhood. You would erase this to punish me? Her words pierced the silence. The photo lingered, flickering in the projector light, a child's frozen smile filling the room with innocence betrayed. Marcus's face contorted. Sweat streamed down his temples. His breathing became shallow, ragged. Then, in a sudden burst of desperation, he lunged toward the evidence cart. He reached for the power cord of the projector. His fingers grasped at the cable, intent on ripping it from the wall. The audience gasped. "Wham!" a reporter cried out. But before Marcus could pull, a heavy hand clamped down on his wrist. "Enough," the bailiff growled, shoving him back into his seat. Marcus stumbled, panting, his face red with fury and shame. The clerk's pen fell silent. The gallery exhaled in relief. The image of Clara's daughter still glowed on the wall, untouchable now, preserved. Clara turned back to the judge. Her robe swayed with the movement, the golden edge catching light. She raised her voice so all could hear. Let the record show that the defendant attempted to interfere with the presentation of evidence in open court. Let the record also show that despite his efforts, the truth remains. Judge Whitaker's eyes narrowed. So noted. Clara pressed another key. A video appeared on the wall. Grainy but clear. The body cam footage of the IT technician, recorded when Marcus had frantically attempted to purge the drives before trial. The technician's voice came through the speakers. Mr. Doyle, these deletions violate the preservation notice you received. If you continue, you could be held in contempt. Marcus's voice, furious. I don't care. They're mine. She doesn't deserve them. The footage froze. The words, she doesn't deserve them, echoed through the chamber like a confession. Clara faced the gallery. This is not love. This is control. This is not memory. This is erasure. She tapped again. A graph appeared, a line chart showing the number of deletion attempts Marcus had made. There were 3 in total, each labeled with a timestamp. These numbers are not just deletions, Clara said, her voice cutting. They are deliberate acts of destruction. They are intent. She pressed once more. Bars appeared, complaints filed against Marcus at his company for misuse of data, for overreach, for unauthorized deletions. Small at first, then piling higher, higher, until the scale spoke for itself. The prosecutor shifted again, shame creeping across his face. Clara did not gloat. She did not sneer. She simply stood, a living counterweight to the lies that had dominated the chamber hours before. Each new file appeared like a hammer striking. Paris, Tokyo, the canyon, birthdays, anniversaries, family, life. The gallery murmured louder now. The tide had turned completely. The lie had cracked, and through the fissure poured light, data, memory. Marcus sat trembling. His hands twitched. His lips muttered nonsense, words no longer coherent. Clara looked at him, not with hatred, but with finality. You thought you could erase me. Erase us. But every deletion leaves a trace. Every lie leaves metadata. And metadata does not lie. Judge Whitaker leaned forward, voice grave. This evidence is admitted in full. The gavel struck. Bang! And the sound was both verdict and exorcism. The audience erupted in whispers, in gasps, in furious scribbles of reporters capturing history. Marcus crumpled back in his seat, the sweat staining his shirt, the tremor in his hands refusing to cease. Clara stood tall, her robe heavy but righteous on her shoulders. She had not only defended herself, it weaponized truth. The montage of evidence continued, each file another blow, until Marcus no longer looked like the keeper of memory, but the destroyer of it. Until his face no longer reflected confidence, but collapse. And when the final photo appeared, the Venice image she had printed earlier, glowing now with its metadata box, timestamp, GPS, all undeniable. The gallery broke into a collective silence that was almost reverent. Clara's voice lowered, softer than before, but cutting sharper than any blade. Law. This is not just law. This is life. These are not just files. They are proof we were here. Marcus covered his face with his hands. The evidence had spoken, and his lies were dead. The courtroom was no longer a battlefield between Marcus Doyle and Clara Jensen. It had grown into something larger. Something that reached beyond one marriage, one USB stick, one archive of photos. Clara sensed it. She adjusted the black robe on her shoulders and turned from Marcus toward the gallery, her voice carrying not just across the chamber but into the cameras broadcasting to the world outside. This case, she began, calm but resonant, isn't just about 2 ex-spouses. It's about digital control, about erasing people's history at will. The words reverberated like an indictment of an entire era. Reporters froze mid-scribble. Phones rose higher, recording. The clerk's pen scratched furiously, underlining each phrase. Clara crossed to the evidence board, grabbed a blank sheet of white paper, and with a black marker drew 3 words in bold letters. Then she drew arrows, connecting them in a chain. Memory. Power. Control. She held it high, then taped it to the wall so the cameras could capture it clearly. This, she said, pointing to the first word, is how it starts. Memory. Our photos, our files, our digital footprints. What we choose to preserve is who we are. Her finger traced the arrow. When one person controls memory, they gain power to decide what existed and what didn't. She tapped the final word. And when power is unchecked, it becomes control. Control of lives. Control of truth. Control of history itself. The gallery stirred, the murmur growing louder. Some nodded, some whispered, some simply stared. On social media, the feed lit up instantly. Clips of Clara's hand underlining the chain. Memory. Power? Control exploded across platforms. Memes were born in real time. One reporter whispered to another, "That's tomorrow's headline. Forget the divorce. This is about digital coercion." Clara turned back to the judge. Statistics prove this is not isolated. 78% of divorces now involve disputes over digital data. 1 in 4 victims reports being locked out of photos of their own children. Cities across the United States have spent millions handling lawsuits tied to digital coercive control. She let the numbers settle, like weights lowering onto the chamber floor. "These aren't numbers," Clara continued. "They are people. People who lost more than files. They lost the right to remember." A hand rose in the gallery. A woman, middle-aged, her face pale but determined, stood shakily. She held a photograph creased, worn from being folded too many times. "My daughter," the woman said, her voice breaking. She raised the photo higher. "This is the only picture I have left. My ex-husband deleted every digital copy, every birthday, every school recital, every smile. All I have is this one print." The courtroom went silent. Even Marcus's angry breathing seemed to stop. The woman's hand trembled as she lowered the photo back against her chest. "I came today because I needed to see someone fight back. Because I couldn't." Her voice cracked, but the words landed like stone. The silence that followed was absolute. A young man in the back stood next. His hands shook, but his voice rang clear. "My fiancé erased all of our wedding photos the night before he left me. Years gone. Friends, family, the vows? I'll never get them back." The gallery gasped softly. Even Judge Whitaker leaned back, eyes narrowed with recognition of scale. Clara gave them both a nod, her voice steady. "Thank you for your courage." She turned back to the bench. "This is why we cannot treat digital abuse as trivial. It was not about files. It is about identity, dignity, memory." She stepped closer to the jury box, her tone sharpening like a blade honed on stone. "This court must understand. Digital erasure is not an accident. It is a weapon, a tool of coercive control. And it is spreading." The prosecutor shifted uneasily in his seat. He could feel the ground shifting under his case, his earlier alliance with Marcus unraveling. Clara pressed on. "The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division has already launched investigations into digital abuse cases. Consent decrees have been signed in multiple cities to address systemic misuse of data. And still, victims are left voiceless because the law lags behind technology." Her voice rose, not in anger, but in urgency. "Today, this courtroom has the chance to close that gap. To say, once and for all, that memories cannot be weaponized. That digital abuse is abuse." She pointed again at the paper taped to the wall. "Memory, power, control. Control. This isn't just my story. It's all of ours." Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in. A collective hum filled the chamber, an awareness that something larger was happening. Clara's voice softened, drawing the room in closer. "When Marcus tried to delete our photos, he wasn't just punishing me. He was rehearsing a pattern we see across the country. Men and women erasing each other's histories. Parents cutting off children from their own past. This must end." She paused, eyes sweeping the gallery. Dozens of faces stared back, some tearful, some furious, all caught in the gravity of her words. "We cannot legislate memory, but we can protect it. We can guard against its theft. We can ensure that no one, No spouse, no partner, no corporation erases the record of a life lived. The young clerk who had hesitated earlier whispered under her breath as she wrote, almost a prayer. Protect memory, protect people. Clara straightened, her robe heavy across her shoulders. This is not a personal feud anymore. This is precedent. What we decide here today will echo in courtrooms across America. She gestured toward Marcus, slumped and sweating in his chair. He is not the first to try. And if we do nothing, he will not be the last. Her eyes locked on the judge. But if we act, if we name digital erasure for what it is, if we hold it accountable, we can change the future. We can protect history itself. The chamber pulsed with silence. Not empty silence, but charged, electric, waiting to erupt. And then the woman with the creased photo whispered again, barely audible, but caught by microphones nonetheless. She's fighting for all of us. The words rippled through the gallery, through the feeds broadcasting online, through the hashtags already trending. Clara Jensen had ceased being a plaintiff. She was no longer just a judge. Was becoming a symbol. And symbols cannot be erased. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Evidence had been shown, lies dismantled, the bigger picture unveiled. All that remained was the final word. The moment of reckoning. Judge Whitaker gestured. Ms. Jensen, you may offer closing remarks before sentencing. Clara Jensen rose. She smoothed the black robe across her shoulders, the weight of it grounding her. Her gaze swept the chamber. First the judge, then the jury box, then the gallery filled with strangers who were no longer strangers, but witnesses to something larger. She drew in a slow breath. Her voice came calm but resolute. I once stayed silent when a friend lost every photo of her father, Clara began. I thought silence was neutrality. I thought the law would eventually find her justice without my voice. I regret that choice, because silence only strengthened the one who destroyed her memories. I won't stay silent now. The words spread like ripples. Reporters scribbled, heads lifted, even the bailiff shifted his weight as if bracing himself for what came next. Clara's eyes turned toward Marcus, who sat slumped, sweat-soaked, his fists clenched but empty. You thought erasure was power. That if you deleted enough files, you could delete me. Delete us. But memories are not yours to weaponize. They belong to both of us. They belong to everyone who lived them. She raised her voice, clear as a bell. Memories are not weapons. Memories are not bargaining chips. Memories are not his alone. Blah, the gallery murmured. Phones rose higher. Hashtags were born in the moment. Then Clara's tone sharpened, her words cutting in rhythm, the cadence of an executioner. Delete one photo, delete one smile. Delete one album, delete one family. Delete one history, delete one truth. The repetition struck like hammer blows. Each line silenced another pocket of the gallery until the only sound left was Clara's voice. Judge Whitaker leaned forward, eyes fixed on her. Your request for relief, Ms. Face. Jensen? Clara turned, her robe sweeping behind her. She faced the bench with unshakable clarity. That this court order, Mr. Doyle, to release all shared digital assets in full, cease and desist from further deletion, and compensate for damages incurred. That this court affirm, as precedent, that digital erasure constitutes coercive control. The judge nodded solemnly. Your closing has been noted. He shuffled papers, his gavel poised. The entire room froze. Marcus suddenly blurted, voice trembling, Injustice. She just wants to humiliate me. Whitaker's glare silenced him. The chamber descended into stillness, heavy, expectant. Then came the verdict. Marcus Doyle. The judge declared, his tone granite. This court finds your actions to be deliberate destruction of joint marital property, violation of preservation orders, and acts of coercive control through digital means. You are hereby ordered to restore and release all digital files to Ms. Z. Jensen, to compensate damages in the amount of $250,000, and to refrain permanently from erasing, altering, or withholding shared digital property. He raised the gavel. So ordered. Bang! The sound reverberated like thunder through stone. But the reaction was not what tradition dictated. There was no applause, no cheering. Instead, a strange silence, filled with the rustle of pockets and the soft click of buttons. Dozens, then hundreds of phones lifted into the air. Screens glowed like a constellation of witnesses. Every person in the gallery pointed their lens. Not at Clara, not at Marcus, not even at Judge Whittaker, but at the screen above the bench where the verdict text appeared. They were not clapping, they're archiving. They were ensuring that this moment, this sentence would never be erased. The image of the verdict glowed across phones, screens reflecting screens, a hall of mirrors in the age of digital justice. Clara's throat tightened. For a moment, she saw herself not as lawyer, not as judge, not even as plaintiff, but as a fragment of history caught in preservation. Justice wasn't merely declared, it was recorded. She turned once more to Marcus. His head hung low, his shoulders caving inward. The man who had tried to erase her now looked erased himself. Clara stepped closer, her voice softer now but no less sharp. "Justice is not a gavel striking wood," she said. "It's a heart no longer erased." The lines settled like dust after a storm, clinging to everything it touched. The clerk, wide-eyed, whispered as she wrote it down. "Art no longer erased." Whittaker stood. "This court is adjourned." The gavel struck again. Bang! But it was unnecessary. The phones had already captured the verdict, the proverb, the symbol. Clara Jensen remained standing, her robe heavy with truth, her shoulders lighter with relief. Loud. She had not only won, she had changed the script. The gallery erupted, not in applause, but in the sound of dozens of files being saved, uploaded, shared. The future was already backing itself up. The verdict had been spoken, the gavel had fallen, and the phones had captured it all. But justice does not end with a sentence. It ripples. It echoes. It rewrites lives far beyond the courtroom walls. For Marcus Doyle, the echo was devastating. Within days of the trial's conclusion, news outlets carried his name not as an engineer, not as a husband, but as a cautionary tale. Headlines screamed, "Tech professional found guilty of digital coercion." His company, once proud of his technical prowess, terminated his contract. In his HR file, stamped in unforgiving black ink, was a single phrase, "Termination for digital coercion." It followed him like a scarlet letter. Recruiters turned away. Former colleagues deleted his number. His LinkedIn profile became a wasteland, comments flooded with scorn. At conferences where he had once lectured on cloud security, his name was now whispered only as a warning. If you control memory, you control people. And that control can destroy you. Marcus had thought he could erase Clara. In the end, he erased himself. For Clara Jensen, the echoes were different. She stepped out of the courthouse into a storm of cameras, microphones, and flashing lights. Not as a victim, not even just as a judge. But as something larger, a symbol. Reporters framed her as the face of digital rights. Editorials called her trial the first landmark case of memory justice. Her phrase, "A memory is not a hostage," was quoted in headlines from New York to Tokyo. Students painted it on banners. Activists printed it on t-shirts. Hashtags trended across platforms. And yet, Clara remained grounded. She still taught art, still believed in preserving beauty, but now her lessons included the fragility of memory in a digital age, and the responsibility to protect it. She spoke softly to one journalist outside the courthouse. "I didn't win this case alone. Every person who's lost their photos, their files, their proof of life, they stood with me." The system, too, began to shift. Within weeks, lawmakers in several states introduced bills collectively referred to as the ASS Digital Marital Assets Acts. These proposals sought to clarify that photos, videos, and other digital records created during a marriage were subject to equitable division, just like houses, cars, and bank accounts. Senators cited Clara's case directly on the floor. One representative held up a printed copy of her Venice photo and declared, We must ensure no one is ever locked out of their own past again. For the first time, legislatures spoke openly about digital coercive control as a form of abuse deserving recognition in law. The ripples reached individuals too. A father in Michigan received a court order restoring his access to years of photos of his son, which his ex-wife had hidden behind password locks. He wrote Clara a handwritten letter. "Thank you. Last night I showed my boy the pictures from his first baseball game. He didn't remember the score, but he remembered the smile. You gave us that back." Psych. The letter arrived folded in half, the ink smudged from a tear. Clara kept it in her desk drawer. Meanwhile, the young clerk from the trial, the one who had dropped her pen in shock when Clara revealed her robe, submitted her law school application the very next week. In her personal statement, she wrote only one line at the end. "Today, I learned memories can be law." The academic world followed. At Columbia Law School, professors convened to design a new elective course, Digital Justice and Memory Rights. The syllabus began with Clara's trial as a central case study. Students would debate, what is a memory worth in court? Who owns digital identity? Can deletion be classified as harm? The dean, in his announcement, declared, "This is not science fiction. This is jurisprudence in the age of the cloud." Applications for the course exceeded capacity in the first semester. Students quoted Clara in essays, wrote theses on digital abuse, and debated how future courts should handle the ownership of memories. Clara, invited as a guest lecturer, stood at the podium months later, watching rows of eager faces. She told them, "Technology outpaces law, but memory must never outpace justice." The students erupted in applause. And then there was the courthouse itself. The storage wing of the building, the dusty, overlooked archive where old files and evidence were kept, was officially renamed. A bronze plaque was unveiled, its letters cut deep into the metal. The Hall of Digital Justice. Beneath it, etched smaller, was Clara's own phrase, "A memory is not a hostage." On the day of the dedication, Clara walked through the hall alone before the crowds arrived. The plaque caught the morning light, the words gleaming as if alive. She reached out and traced the engraving with her fingertips. Her heart swelled, not with pride, but with gravity. These words were no longer just hers. They belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced, erased, or locked out of their past. For Marcus, there was no plaque, no lecture, no letter of thanks. Only the echo of his own erasures. He moved out of state, rumors said, unable to find work, unable to find redemption. For Clara, the echoes continued to grow. Activists invited her to speak at rallies. Lawmakers cited her testimony. Survivors of digital abuse wrote to her by the hundreds. She answered each letter she could, even if only with a single line. "You are seen. Your memories matter." And for the world beyond, the lesson was indelible. That memories are not just files. They are families. They are history. They are proof that a life was lived. The trial of Marcus Doyle had not simply divided assets. It had rewritten the law of memory itself. One evening, months after the verdict, Clara walked past the courthouse again. The cameras were gone. The crowds moved on. The bronze plaque outside the archive hall glimmered under the streetlight. She stopped. The words etched into the wall seemed to speak back to her. Memory is not a hostage. Clara Jensen smiled faintly, her reflection shimmering in the bronze. She whispered to herself, not as judge or plaintiff or symbol, but simply as a woman who had lived, lost, and fought. And it never will be again. She turned, her footsteps echoing into the night, the hall behind her glowing like a beacon for the digital age. The courthouse doors opened, and Clara Jensen stepped into the roar of the outside world. The marble steps were flooded with reporters, microphones thrust forward like spears, cameras flashing in relentless bursts of light. The noise was overwhelming, questions shouted, headlines already forming. But Clara stood at the top of the stairs, robe still on her shoulders, silver hairpin catching the late afternoon sun. She raised a hand, and remarkably, the crowd hushed. Her voice, when it came, was deliberate. Strong, but with the weariness of someone who had fought not just for herself, but for something far greater. Silence only feeds injustice, Clara said. The words rolled out like scripture, carried on the hum of satellite vans and live streams. Lies kill faster than fists. Share this story, so no one ever loses their memories to control again. The flashbulbs crackled. Reporters scribbled furiously. A few in the crowd nodded, their own phones lifted high to record not just her face but her words. Then Clara paused. She drew in a long breath, her shoulders rising and falling beneath the heavy robe. Her eyes met the nearest camera lens. And then another. And then another. Until finally, she was no longer speaking to reporters or strangers on the steps. She was speaking directly to whoever was watching, on phones, on televisions, on laptops, in dark rooms. She broke the fourth wall, stepping beyond the courthouse into living rooms, bedrooms, subway rides. Her voice dropped lower, almost intimate. If you're watching this, maybe someone kept what was yours. Maybe they locked you out of your own past. Maybe you lost photos. Maybe you lost years. But hear me now. She leaned closer, her eyes piercing through the lens. You never lost your right to remember. Share this story. A hush fell over the crowd, though the city's noise still pulsed beyond. Her words weren't just about law anymore. They were about grief, about dignity, about the fragile scaffolding of identity that survives in snapshots and files. She straightened, the robe shifting with the movement, and let her voice rise again. Actions have consequences, she declared, each word a hammer. And today, consequence backed up justice. The line hit like thunder. The gallery of reporters inhaled sharply. Pens froze, then scribbled wildly. Social media feeds lit up instantly with the phrase. Some turned it into a hashtag, others into a banner. Within minutes, the words would be everywhere. Clara didn't smile. She didn't need to. The weight of the moment was not in triumph, but in testimony. She looked once more into the cameras, her final call, not just to action, but to purpose. Back up your memories. Back up your voice. Back up your justice. The crowd erupted. Not in applause, but in a strange, reverent silence. The kind of silence that listens, that records, that saves. Cameras continued to flash, but now every image seemed to frame her. Not as a plaintiff, not as a judge, but as a living emblem of resistance. A young reporter whispered to her colleague, "That's the quote. That's the one they'll carve in bronze." And Clara, feeling the echo of her own words ripple outward across the square, across the city, across the feeds already climbing toward virality, turned away from the microphones. She descended the courthouse steps with measured grace. Behind her, the wall of cameras caught every second. In front of her, the crowd parted like water. As she walked into the noise of the city, her words remained suspended in the air, replaying in headlines, in hashtags, in hearts. Maybe you lost photos. Maybe you lost years. But you never lost your right to remember. His actions have consequences. And today, consequence backed up justice. To back up your memories. Back up your voice. Back up your justice. And with that, the story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever been erased, and everyone who refused to be.